Welcome to another episode here at Lightingbot. Thanks for stopping by and viewing. For the people that are new, that was our general mentorship video for people who want to join as students to learn from different mentors. Just a reminder, there's a huge community behind Lightingbot. You can get some portfolio review. You could get some highlight if you want some, if you need some help with visibility. There's some Unreal tutorial that's free on our YouTube. There is Unity tutorials as well. As I said, there's a mentorship. There's a new course for lighting for games that's being launched as well soon. A lot of content and interviews. So have a go when you have time. If you don't have time, pick some specific shorts that's been edited down for your pleasure. And tomorrow we are launching the lighting challenge. Obviously, it's already full and ready, but you can watch the activity, you can participate, help troubleshoot if someone has any problem. With that said, let's welcome our guest today, Christy Page, to the stream. Hello, Christy.
Hello.
So how are you?
Good. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. We had a warm up, so we are we have a kind of a good idea what's going on, and the rest will be just like this.
Yep.
Basically. So, Christy, let's first do the basics, which is your background. Where did you study? What happened? How did you get into lighting? And the road ahead. And where are you now?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, we had a lot of art classes, and at the time, I started looking at art college, thinking that I wanted to be a 2D animator for like anime or something. So I started looking at art schools, and fortunately, I looked at Savannah College of Art and Design. And the reason I liked SCAD it was because not only did it have like an animation program, but it had a bunch of other stuff. Because even at the time, while that was kind of my goal, I knew that there was a lot of benefit in trying a bunch of stuff out. And if I wanted to switch, there was another program for that. So I got into SCAD. I went to the school. And I really, the first year, I went to all the clubs I could go to see the kind of work that was happening there and what the other programs were doing. And I very clearly remember this demonstration of Houdini at the time. And this was, like 10 years ago at least. And it was a demo of the guy was showing you how you can take a single grain of rice and Houdini could turn it into like 1,000 grains of rice and make a pile of rice, and how fast and easy it was. And he was just sitting there playing with it. I was like, that's super cool. That seems more along what I would want to do, because I kind of realized that there's a little bit of two different kinds of artists. There's those that like have a lot of like a strong imagination and wants to build like something you haven't seen before and is happy to do like something new and different, and those that really is more interested in like recreating the world as you see it and find more satisfaction and like taking something and making it yourself and like achieving like, yeah, I did that too. And I kind of realized I was more of that type, and I really enjoyed the VFX program there. You went through modeling, you went through texturing, matte painting, and lighting. And they had a really great lighting professor who came from Rhythm and Hues, which is now long gone. But she taught us the Rhythm and Hues way and how to create shots and do render layers and everything that was important at the time. And through SCAD as well, we had lots of opportunities to meet recruiters and stuff. So I met the DreamWorks recruiter there. Didn't get a job. I left SCAD without a job. But I had a reel, and I had a friend that was offering his apartment for a month while they were gone in Los Angeles. So I packed up my car and I drove to LA, and I spent a month just looking for work. And my first job was just a company that does car renders. And so that wasn't exactly, what I was looking for, but I still learned a lot. I still was using Nuke. And from there, I was reached out to by that DreamWorks recruiter again, who said, didn't hire you last time, but are you interested in trying again? And from there, I got into DreamWorks, and I was at DreamWorks for a really long time. And that's basically the beginning of my story. So I think I like to talk about that because, like, I didn't get a job right away. In fact, I had applied for DreamWorks and I got rejected the first time.
So let's talk about that. Let's take a U-turn. Let's stop by this topic of not getting a job. How was it? Why do you think that was the case, and how did you solve this problem of not getting a job?
Well, so that first time, and so the job I was applying for at the time, DreamWorks had this like technical artist position or technical assistant position, not a tech artist. So it was TA, but it was tech assistant. And so this position was supposed to be like to help the lighters, like do some of their busy work, help the TDs with some of their busy work. And so one of the things I had done is I had gone through a couple of rounds of interviews with them, but didn't make it. And the one thing that I found really valuable is when they said, "Oh, sorry, we're not picking you. Please try again." I was like, "Can I get some feedback?" And so they actually gave me a little bit of feedback, and they told me at the time that I needed to know I didn't show enough programming skills, and that's what a TA had needed at the time, was to be able to program. And so the next time around, when they said, "Hey, we're going to hire a couple more TAs," I was like, "Oh, and so you guys told me to, work on programming." I worked on programming. I worked on Python, and I've gotten better at that. And they actually told me that like they really appreciated that I had taken their notes and worked at it. And I think I've heard that from a couple of recruiters of where, they see an artist, they're not particularly ready at this time, but it's so very valuable to continue to update that work. Like even if, you felt like your portfolio is in an okay place right now, the fact that to see an artist that's constantly like adding to that portfolio in some way or another, or constantly kind of improving, it looks great to a recruiter, because it shows that, you will then be able to learn into that job, because there's always going to be some learning. And but if you like apply over and over again with the exact same reel, it's not helpful. You didn't make it the first time. What's different now that will make them try to take you this time around?
Because some recruiters might be paying attention at you for the long term as well. They'll be like, okay, this one is just constantly making new stuff, and they can tell it's improving. And then there might be a position 2-3 months later, or even 6 months or whatever. They'll be like, hey, I remember Christy. She was like, keep spamming the internet with new stuff. She's improved a lot. Let's talk to her now. Let's see how she's feeling. So that definitely makes sense. Now, from your point of view, because you've obviously been a lead lighting artist, does that mean you have had influence and say in recruiting people as well?
I have interviewed, but I don't have say in the recruiting process. So we've looked at stuff and we've interviewed, but that's it. Yeah.
So let's look at that from your point of view when you interview other people. So what are your typical questions that you would ask, and why are you asking them? And you obviously have influence, otherwise you wouldn't be interviewing, right? So what do you do in your decision-making process when you're picking the candidates, I'm assuming, so someone else can make the final decision? So let's talk a little bit about that. So people who are applying and they're sitting in front of the lead lighting artist and producer and like, oh shit, what's going on? Let's help calm them down a bit.
Yeah. So, I have to say, one of at least for us in my group that was doing the interviewing, by the time that you are in the interview phase, they have a pretty strong interest in you. And so they usually, a good interview panel is trying to help you succeed, like fill in some of those gaps. Like we, see your work. This seems like this will be a good fit for our team. Now we just want to meet you and see if like you are interested in the project. You are interested in if we have questions about problem solving or culture or things like that. One of the things I find super valuable for interviews is to express a lot of interest in the company. And so some of the things that I find very helpful is to like do a little bit of research beforehand, read some of their papers, know the pipeline, don't ask, hopefully you can be able to figure out like what kind of tools they're using, any kinds of like SIGGRAPH papers they've released recently talking about tech, so that you are able to ask educated questions about it, like what's the day in the life of a lighting artist at the studio? It's kind of a basic question, but more of a question of like, oh, I see that like you guys are switching to a new software. How is that going? Or let's see, another one was, I was interviewing for a project that hadn't been announced, and so I was reading a little bit of news about it, and I was able to say like, oh, I see a producer made a style comment. Can you explain to me what you think he means by that? And so we were able to talk about the style of the project, and it becomes actually like a conversation, and it's really helpful when you are able to have a conversation with your interviewer, because then it kind of shows that you're really interested and allows you to show yourself a little bit more. And the other one I think is super valuable is when they start asking tech questions, because sometimes what they will do is they'll be like, oh, what would you do to deal with a reflection of a matte painting in water?
That's when I open the door and I leave. I'm like, yeah, see ya. Bye.
And so, it's one thing to like answer the question. I think another thing that's really helpful is to like have, without breaking in any NDAs, of course, to be able to like explain a situation in which you solved a problem. And so you're talking about, they're asking you tech questions, you're answering the tech questions, and then you'd be like, oh, in my last project, we were working a lot with the production designer, and there was a really tough shot. And so we did a bunch of stuff to make sure things were really flexible for him, or I went through a couple of extra steps to solve this problem. And not only is it answering their question, but you're giving them a real world answer, because you can always like give someone a textbook answer. It's different when you're actually in that situation and in a really stressful situation. Are you able to do that textbook answer? Like, you can know the textbook thing in your head, but can you do it on the fly? And so I think that's also helpful, because it kind of cements things in. And sometimes like when people are just like giving you a textbook answer, you're like, well, it's cool, I know there is stuff, but like, have they had to deal with difficult shots? Have they solved a problem? Have they had to, deal with a couple of different lighting notes from a bunch of different people? I'm kind of realizing these are a little bit more senior lighting questions, but I'm hoping it's kind of that you can like distill some of that out of there, is like trying to show interest in the studio and being able to talk about challenging situations that you've dealt with and when working on your lighting stuff.
So, did you guys do like art test as well, or no? You skipped art test? Okay.
No art tests, especially at places like DreamWorks or a lot of the big studios. Everything is either proprietary or heavily modified. So it's kind of difficult to do that. But I think that's also another reason why when you are talking through your reel, that you can talk through like a shot to be like, well, this is what I did and this is how I made it my own. Because there's a lot of times, especially when you're a junior or mid artist, where you are receiving a shot from a lead and it's basically done. It's almost done. Especially as you're a junior, you often are getting some of the easy shots where it's like the rig just kind of dropped in really naturally, and it's just about kind of like tweaking that key light just a little bit to get it to the final. So if you can like point out a shot in which you like worked super hard, solved a problem, used reference to get to a particular look, then that's helpful to show them that you troubleshooted.
So did you only participate in interviews with lighting artists, or would you also participate in technical artists or technical lighting artists, or because normally you often need other type of artists to help with lighting as well?
Not at DreamWorks. We were just, hiring lighting artists. We got rid of that technical assistant position, or DreamWorks got rid of the technical assistant position long ago. And the TDs, the technical directors, which are more of the pipeline side, they go through their own system, are interviewed by TDs and not by artists. But lighting artists usually will be asked some technical questions, especially when it comes to like some of the nitty gritties of Nuke. Like, do you know the difference between an add and a multiply and an over? Things like that.
Cool. So would you say if a lighting artist knows some kind of programming language, would you say that's beneficial?
I think it is a little beneficial. It's not often that you need it. A good lighting team will have a nice balance of like really artistic lighters and really technical lighters. And so it's good to know a little bit of everything, but not have to feel like you're going to lean on it. It also will depend on the studio and how flexible they are with you getting into stuff like that. Some studios feel like the artists should not be, dealing with any of the programming tech stuff, and other ones it's a little more encouraged that like you've been working in Nuke, you've been able to distill something down into a gizmo, you can use it. Or when you're in a Linux environment, it's really helpful to know some bash, because you can then, use your bash to help you parse through, all the files that you have, renaming files, things like that. But over time, I've been using it a little bit less and less, or it like depends on the program. Now that I've been using Unreal, I have a little bit more of a need for knowing blueprints. Also, a lot of the programs will have like kind of funky languages, or like Python's good to know, but like Katana, we were on Katana, and that uses Lua.
Right. Yeah.
But if you just kind of know some basic programming, I feel like you can adapt to anything,
So whenever you were helping with recruitment, anything, was a degree specifically an impact? Would that reveal you anything for you in terms of? Because to me, when I see a degree, what it really tells me is someone is able to complete something, they can commit to something. That's normally what a degree at least represent on a minimum level for me. But when you were doing recruitment, did you ever like pay attention to it, or was it just a portfolio and then culture and attitude and soft skills and those things? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, a degree is definitely secondary. The portfolio is most important. What a degree sometimes will, especially in some of the bigger studios, like I say, I come from SCAD, and so often I go to a new place and they ask, "Oh, where'd you go to school?" And I say SCAD, and they're like, they have kind of, they understand the school. They know other people that went to SCAD. They kind of know what to expect from like an artist from SCAD, because they know what are the programs they teach them. They know that's, like when I was graduating, Nuke was kind of new-ish. And so they were like knew that SCAD was teaching their students Nuke. And so you there's a little bit of like kind of like a networking that comes with
Like
the
a
school sometimes.
quality assurance, like they know, okay, these are
like,
at least what you can expect. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But that's it. That's secondary, and so like is someone that has a super weak portfolio will not be able to get in because there are things that SCAD, and it's just kind of a secondary thing of like you show a strong portfolio. If you don't have a degree, it doesn't matter unless you need like a visa. But if you have a strong portfolio and then next they see, oh, SCAD, they can be like, oh, do you know this professor or this person that also works at DreamWorks or whatever? It's networky kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it definitely helps with networking, and it definitely helped me with getting visa and moving around. If you have a degree, which is more of a governmental level anyway, so I think that's some benefit of having a degree. I think there's one question I ask just generally to every woman who comes on stream is, in terms of being women in animation and games for that matter, what's your experience been so far? How was it, studying in I would assume male dominated class, and then getting work probably in a male dominated environment? Do you have something that you would like to share, or has it been a good experience, up and down, or because there's always a topic about it, and I do address it when we have girls on the stream. So I thought I'd ask you as well.
Yeah, no, I've been particularly interested in this lately, just because it's nice to have like there's always like some community groups like Women in Animation or like the Women in VFX Discord, and it is something you notice more as you rise up. Well, you notice it because like there was only maybe 5 other women in my degree when we were graduating. And in most of the departments, it's usually me and maybe just a few others. It's always like a small percentage, but usually like people treat you fairly well. You get a little bit of people trying to like explain, don't expect you to know as much sometimes. I always feel like as a woman, I have to work a lot harder to prove myself sometimes as well. And but I'm hoping that kind of changes. A lot of that is like unconscious bias, and so it's very interesting. There's a documentary on Netflix. I can't remember what it's called, but it came out in the last year or something. But talks about unconscious bias, where like a woman, like, so when you're applying for a promotion, you're applying outside of your company to go for a promotion, a man will more likely be hired based on potential, whereas a woman is hired based on experience. So it's more likely, at least that's what unconsciously, the data seems to show, is that like a guy is more likely to be like, well, he did a great job as a lighting artist, he should be able to be a lead. Whereas as a woman, sometimes it's a little harder to prove that. And it's over time, I find that it helps to have to find mentors, to speak up for myself more than I think some of my male colleagues have to do. And it's nothing malicious. Like I said, it's all super unconscious. And some of it is also, women are often more likely to be a little more quiet about, speaking up for themselves, promoting themselves. I find promoting myself very difficult, super difficult. And I feel always uncomfortable after I've done it. After I go into a meeting with someone and be like, well, let's talk about my career and, when I'm going to be able to get a promotion. Afterwards, I'm always, a wreck. And I think it's going to get better over time. I do agree with the fact that it's helpful to see seniors or soups that are female, and as like there's more interest in pulling female leads up and become supervisors and head of lighting and stuff like that, then there'll be more, juniors and mids and mentors to pull those juniors and mids up into senior positions.
Okay.
But I
And
haven't like experienced like anything like outwardly malicious.
but you feel it. You feel like you have to prove, even though someone might not expect you to. You feel you have to prove yourself because of experience and the stories and everything, and you feel at least that some people are thinking you don't know something when you probably do know something. So these are like genuine feelings, at least, that you have. So does that feeling transfer over to like Discord communities and public chat, and does that like stop you from talking and sharing stuff, or do you feel comfortable?
Maybe a little bit. I'm not a super public person in general, and sometimes I do find I like hiding behind like whatever my Discord username is often Owl, and I kind of like hiding behind Owl. And recently, one of the things I had done for myself is like I've made my profile picture look like a little bit more like me, so I'm not so total anonymous. I'm not totally hiding myself. I don't talk on Discord a ton because like I don't. I've worked in proprietary pipelines for such a long time. When someone is like, can someone help me with my, RenderMan render or my Arnold thing, or why is my settings not working in Maya? I don't know the answers to that. But no, I've been feeling, and over time, I feel like I've been building confidence a bit more to be able to speak up in Discords or make
Well, you're on a
notes.
live stream right now, so obviously
I know,
there's
right?
progress,
This
right?
has been a big stretch for me, and I think hopefully it's going well.
Yeah, it is going well, and it actually is hard for me as well to get female artists, lighting artists specifically in my case, to come on the stream. It's not that easy as you think. It's like mostly it's like, no, I don't want to be in the spotlight, or just a no, and I'm like, why not? I mean, because other younger female artists obviously should see that there are other female artists doing stuff and they're successful. I mean, it is it shouldn't be a big deal, but it becomes a big deal that you have been a lighting artist, you studied, became a lead lighting artist. That's not a small feat in itself. But you did mention earlier in private that you probably had some mentors. Is that female mentors specifically, or also male mentors?
A mix. I find that with mentorship, it's there's sometimes you have to realize some of your mentorships are a little more unofficial than official. Like I know you have like an official mentorship, which is nice, but sometimes it's about being bold and reaching out to a supervisor or something in your department or someone on LinkedIn that you kind of respect and be like, hey, do you mind having coffee? I'd love to talk to you about, and kind of have a topic for them. And just those kinds of coffees, I've been kind of saying like, you know what, I should, mentally kind of think of this person as a mentor of mine. And I haven't had a ton of this. I've had a couple of female mentors, both officially and unofficially. But it's I also have a lot of male mentors, and it's also good to make those connections because they become your allies as well, which is very important in general. It's as much as you would like your work to speak for yourself, it's also very important to build your allies inside of your company. And I don't mean like you need to go to them and be like, all right, are you going to, when there's a promotion, are you going to make sure my name is? It's just, building those relationships so that they feel comfortable giving you feedback and you feel comfortable asking you stuff. Yeah. Like I said, it's not totally politics. Some of it is that, if you have a good rapport, with soups in your department, they can give you some feedback or, tell you, like, give you some advice for how to proceed.
Right. So would you consciously look for a female mentor because it matters to you, or doesn't matter, or are you happy if you find a female mentor? Because I'm curious.
So I did go out and I did find a female mentor. She was great, but there's also so much that is so personality based about mentoring or mentorships, and something just really has to click. So I kind of like spread my my net kind of wide when it comes to that, and so I get some stuff from her. And in fact, I think I'm meeting with her this week. But for other female mentors, it's been hard for me to find or have that thing that kind of clicks. Or I've had a couple of really great coffees with some female mentors, and I haven't talked to them for a while. And it's just how things go. I remember I had a really great coffee with a female mentor of mine, and I was pursuing a contract with someone, and she actually was like giving me advice on like negotiating stuff like that. And it was like, oh, I wasn't expecting this in this conversation with you, and you're giving it to me. And it was just so memorably great. You never know what will come out of that. And that's why I think it's important to kind of like not hang on to just one person being your mentor but to kind of like have coffee with a bunch of people that you respect and kind of take little tidbits that here and there like really click with you or are going to help you out in the future.
All right, cool. So should we look at your shared screen and start digesting some of your creative work and get into your creative brain a little bit and kind of see how your thought process is on some of your work? And I'll let you actually take lead here and just I'll let you the experienced lead artist take the lead and just talk through like what's the purpose? Is there a mood? Is there a story? How it all comes together, all right?
Yeah, so this is my demo reel of mostly animation stuff, a little bit of VFX. What I've been working on currently is super, definitely not going to be released for a while. So this is all my stuff from DreamWorks, and it's mostly a collection of stuff from my lead work, stuff I picked out that I've worked a lot on or find very good, a wide range of styles. Like the cool thing about the Boss Baby is that they had this like they had this realistic look and then fantasy. And so this was I got a couple of shots on fantasy where I took the whole thing myself. I was helping them dev some of the look of this. And I was doing so much because a lot of the stuff was super rough. And then this was the realism look. And so this was back to kind of the soft lighting. Fantasy is supposed to be kind of more graphic, hard rims, whereas the realism world of Boss Baby is kind of that soft, glowy, warm lighting. And then some of my stuff from Venom. Venom was difficult because it's two reflective characters. And so all of the stuff was very challenging to make sure that you could see the difference between Venom and Riot. And they were super shiny characters, so there was often many lights to get them because there was two shiny characters in the dark. And so it was about getting all these reflections to show up, to give them shape, because and then you didn't want them going too bright because Venom's supposed to be black, but you didn't want him blending in. Well, back to Trolls. So I'll let a couple more shots play and not talk through all of them. This is a lot of stuff I did lead work for, in which I would get art keys and then take the shot to final.
So let's pause a little bit because I forgot to ask you about what's the difference between being a junior, a mid, a senior, and then eventually becoming a lead. What would you say are some of the key differences according to your experience, at least in the movie animation industry as a lighting artist?
Mm-hmm. Well, with a sequence, usually what happens is a sequence is kind of bid out by the department, and each shot is looked at and is given kind of a difficulty level. And then a couple of shots are always pulled out to be the keys. And these are the shots that the art department and all of the departments have decided are going to be dictate the rest of them, because you've got 20 shots, but we're just going to bring one of them up so that we can figure out how it's going to go and then send it to the other 20. And so what a lead will do is, once that stuff is bid out, they're given the art keys. They're given some of the studio stuff and some of the show stuff that's been established for the characters and for the environments, and then go and match the keys. But then there's often a bunch of shots that are like same as's. So like this sequence, particularly, this was a key shot. This was kind of dictating the look of both the characters and the bubble, and the characters interacting with the bubble. But then afterwards, there was a bunch of shots where it was just kind of an over-the-shoulder, back and forth conversation between Branch and Poppy. And so those shots would be given an easy rating, whereas like this would be dictated as a key, and like a shot like this, where it's like a one-off and so totally different, would mean maybe given more of a difficult level, a mid to difficult level. And then they look at their team and they say like, okay, well, juniors often will get a majority of the easy shots, and then maybe a couple of mid-level shots, and mid-level artists mostly get mid shots, couple of easy ones, couple of hard ones, and the leads will usually just get, difficult shots with maybe a couple of everything as they try to help. And so the lead will then set up the sequence. And then when they dole out shots, they do it based on that difficulty level. And so like you said, this sequence has like 10 easy shots, so we're going to need 2 junior to mid-level artists to take care of this. And so that's what the junior will get, is mostly those easy shots with some more difficult shots for them, just to kind of help them level up their skill. And so like I said, when it came to this sequence, I did this shot, and then the 2 back and forth shots, they were pretty much set up. They're pretty close. They needed a little bit, each shot would need a little bit of love when it comes to like making sure the character looks nice in every shot, because even though they're same as is, the camera is going to shift a little bit, so that's not, maybe the light's not so appealing on the character's face in one shot compared to the other. And so that's where you give it to your lighters, and they just plus it up to make all the shots look nice. And so it's about adjusting those keys and taking care of those nuke nodes and eye specs and some of the other important stuff for DreamWorks. And as you get more experience, you'll be getting less of these shots that are like mostly done or close to complete and just need that little bit of love, and more shots that are different, one-offs, challenging, has stuff like needing to integrate effects elements, needing to integrate crowds, large amount of characters, things like that. So it's usually kind of fluid, and sometimes when it gets really crazy, like senior artists are getting some of these easy shots, and junior artists are maybe being asked to try to take care of these difficult shots, and that's a great experience for everyone. So like these shots. So now that we're getting to some of my older stuff, someone else had started this shot, and Melva, she was the lead, and someone else, I think maybe I got to do that shot myself. And I kept this because like I made a whole bunch of changes to it, or we still had places to go with the shot. She left to go somewhere else, and I was going to finish this shot. And so I kept it because I did a bunch of work. There was a lot of cool integration when it came to Poppy standing on here and interacting with the environment. And so that's why I kept that shot in my reel. And this one too is definitely one of my favorites. I got to do a lot of that myself. I wonder if I can frame back. And so this production designer, he loves to paint in his shadows. He's amazing. I love him, Ramon. And so he painted in these shadows very precisely. And that's one of the things like you don't realize with lighting is how much artistic liberty goes into a lot of shots, in which like, sure, you know, there was a sunlight and there's a whole bunch of stuff floating in space that are causing shadows, but the production designer has very specifically painted in his key this triangle shape because he wants to really frame the collector in that shot. Oh, there we go. And so I spent a ton of time. I remember spending a ton of time getting these like exact shapes to match his painting and getting the balance between the warm light and this cool green light. And then we have the interactive lighting from the swords hitting against the wall. Yeah, these are some of the early shots that I did when I was still like a TA and they were starting to give me shots to do.
Cool. So let's go back to the beginning and let's pick on a little bit about where you put the lights. Is there the key light, the fill light? What you did to actually put it together, so people can kind of visualize. Okay, there's actually not just one light; there's 10 lights or 5 lights, or there's if you can remember anything.
Well, one of the things about, and this is hotly contested or hotly debated, like if you read the Chris's lighting thing, he talks a lot about like your lighting setup should be very simple, super simple. Everyone should be lit by basically the same lights. But there's a lot of times, and it depends a lot on the show and the style, in which that can't be the case, or it's more difficult to deal with that with a simple lighting setup where you just do lights for the entire environment and everything gets lit by it. The challenge with that, you set up, a key light for the table and then a fill light and be like, okay, all the characters and all the environment is all going to be lit by these 2 lights or 3 or whatever. But then, your art director goes like, oh, can you move the key on Timmy? And you're like, oh man, now I have to make an override for just Timmy. Do I split him out into another layer? Do I duplicate the light and do a whole bunch of light linking? Do I do, if I'm lucky enough, can I do like an override just below that only affects Timmy? And so a lot of times with DreamWorks rigs, we will like light the characters kind of separately from the environment. And so maybe it starts on that, or we'll use the same fill light, but key lights are pretty separate, especially you look a shot like this, in which if you look behind her, there's a cone light that's hitting everything in the background. Well, there's kind of the same kind of cone light is supposed to be happening here on the table, but really, you don't really want those kinds of like ugly shadows and like eye sockets and stuff. And so there was a light that was lighting the table and all the stuff on the table that's giving this kind of down light to look like there's a light above. But each of the characters has their own key light so that the lighters would very easily be able to move the lights around, because even, we're looking here, and all the characters keys are actually kind of more towards away from us, so that we have this kind of like nice vignetting of the shot. So like Timmy here is like front of his head and forward, and same here with Grandma, where it's like front of head and forward and not top lit, because we want that nice vignette. And then this also kind of allows us, like, whatever's working on Grandma doesn't work on Grandpa, just in angling and stuff, or brightness. We have a whole bunch of characters here, and they say like, oh man, we're supposed to be looking at Carol talking, but baby Tina is like super bright. Can you bring down Tina? And so that's, in the end, a set like this is actually pretty complexly lit, because all the characters have separated key lights and often rim lights. And usually in the environment, especially with this setup, I was probably had one key light for the table, and then there was probably a much bigger, softer light here in the background to get this like gradient look that they wanted on the walls, and then a separate set of lights in the kitchen, because with this show particularly, there was so much like art directed, painted shadows, shapes. He liked in this background here, there's this like sharp line of the from the light that was incredibly art directed. And so this ended up being a really complex rig. And so that's one of the challenge of the lead lighter, is to try to figure out a way to build a rig so that when someone picks, when I'm done, working on these shots, and I give it to a lighter, that it's not insanity to learn, and I've been successful in some sequences and less successful in other sequences. It all depends. And sometimes partway through, you've given all your shots to lighters, and the production designer like completely derails it.
So what's the difference between a production designer and an art director and you?
So usually production designer is kind of more broad, in which he is the one that's making sure that everything looks like it belongs in the film. And so he is involved with modeling, he's involved with texturing. He's not so involved with animation, but heavily involved with lighting. And then the art director is the one that's really focused on the style of the show, and more of like a broader shot-based thing. So our art directors often like do a lot of the paintings, but usually both of them are in dailies, and both of them will give you notes, at least at the way the DreamWorks would do it.
And how does it work according to your experience, when because you said you specified in one shot with the triangle, the production designer kind of said, I want like this. In the kitchen one, you specified the art director wanted this. Do you often mostly focus on making sure someone else gives you explicitly what to do, or do you give your vision an idea, or how's that communication, collaboration, and workflow in your experience?
It depends on the show in the studio. At DreamWorks, it was very strongly art directed. We got lots of artwork. And so you may get to do a little bit of that back and forth discussion. Usually what it is that you get a bunch of keys. You have a sequence and it's got like 4 keys, and you start to build the shots separately. But then when you look at the whole sequence together, you're like, something's not working. And there will be times where you go back and forth with the production designer, or the paintings the keys that you got from art department look nice in 2D, but there's just something about it in 3D where it doesn't quite work right. And that's where you get a little bit of more artistic liberty. And to me, it's usually mostly the puzzle of like, you have a 2D painting that you're trying to match, and then all the rest of the shots also have to feel or look like the shot, especially with stuff like the dining room table. Like, you get a key from this angle, and maybe you get one more other key from another angle, but like, you have to make sure that if the camera's going all right around the table, that it will look nice. Like, you haven't just lit for this one shot. you need to have a rig that will hopefully work in any angle. And that's like the challenge.
So, how much of the environment, if any, is matte painting in animated features compared to CG, or is fully just 3D everything and there's no matte painting involved?
A lot of CG movies are very CG with a little bit of matte painting. It depends on the shot. Usually, if there's going to be a lot of character involvement and a lot of shots in that environment, it will be mostly CG. The instances in which you would want to go matte painting or digimatte, because our digimatte artists do a lot of CG work as well, is when it's like a one-off. Like, oh, what's the point of putting this completely through the pipeline if it's just this wide shot of like Poppy standing on a branch looking out into the environment? That's more going to be matte painting. But if you like look at this shot, the only matte painting is this top corner where you see the sky. Or this one was interesting. Just the characters are CG, and I did the beams and all of the little characters, the note faces. And here, everything behind these metronomes is matte painting. This is all CG for Venom. And most of this other stuff is a lot of CG. So like with this shot, like this tree was CG, but behind it is matte painting. And it really is kind of like the scope of the project. So I think this cloud was CG, but all the clouds behind them is matte painting. Same here. This would be like characters are CG, bubble CG, matte painting behind it. It really depends on like the scope of the project or the shots.
So, but it is common to use matte paintings in some shots, especially the distance ones, the background ones, right. Basically. Is it to reduce the render time, or what's the purpose for it?
It's a mix. Some of it is render time. Some of it is, like I said, you don't often see those assets, that skyline, that whatever. So it's easier for a matte painter to just take care of it from that single angle instead of have that asset go through modeling, texturing, through the traditional pipeline to finish a shot. Don't wonder if I have anything else that's super. So this too, and also too, it had to help with complexity, especially with stuff in the distance that are just going to be silhouette. So like these foreground rocks were CG, but there were many layers of background rocks back there that was matte painting. And again, it's just to kind of reduce the load on the department, because the matte painting is very nimble. CG, lots of CG. Even this is mostly CG. I think in this, it may have ended around the water tower, and then beyond that is matte painting. Especially with stuff like this, when you have like cities and stuff like that, you don't want to have like lighters have to go out there in the distance and like drop lights down for just this one shot in which you're like, seeing from a distance. It's easier for a matte painter to just work from this camera.
Cool. And you mentioned you were experimenting with the Unreal Engine these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been a bit of a journey for me. Yeah. I think a bit of it has been, we at DreamWorks, we worked with Roger Deakins on a couple of shows. And I've been in his presence, but I didn't really interact with him. And last year he started a podcast. And in the episode where he talks about his experience at DreamWorks, he mentions how, like, usually when he's setting up a shot, he's doing lighting and layout in the same thing. And he didn't understand why in animation that they were separate like that. And how he kind of had wished that they were together. I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's a cool idea. And at the time, too, there was all these discussions about virtual production. The Lion King was apparently an awesome show in which they had a CG lighter on set with Caleb Deschanel, the DP, and Caleb would be like, in his like VR or iPad, like looking at the lions and directing the CG artist while he's like setting up the camera. And I thought that was like super cool. I thought that was an interesting next step. Is, you know, I've been working with like production designers, which is lovely, but you know, the next is to kind of learn cameras and working with DPs. And so with this new virtual production stuff, either in VR or multi-session with real time, there's been able to do that. You're able to have a DP in there framing stuff up, and you have a CG lighter in there being his gaffer. So I was able to do the Epic Fellowship and learn Unreal that way, as well as on your own. You know, the Fellowship is awesome because it's one of those, it's like going to college basically, in which you like have a deadline. You have someone being like, all right, you have to finish this short and like prove you can do it. And I did that, and that got me some work as a lighter for Happy Mushroom. And I did similar-ish things where I was a Unreal lighter for them, working on projects where there would be a DP, and there was a couple of times in which, you know, I'd be in that session in which the DP is setting up cameras and making lighting notes. And so I think that I feel that's what's next for me, or what feels like the future is. Seems really cool, this new virtual production world in which lighting gets to set up the lighting for the environment in pre-production, and then push it out of Unreal, send it to post if it needs to go to post, and they take what you've started and finish the shots. I heard on Lion King, the lighter who set up the lighting during the pre-production stuff, a lot of that lighting ended up in final. I mean, it wasn't him at the end, but he was the one that dictated it. So that's what's got me interested about that.
I don't know for sure, but look up Lucas Pozzi. We interviewed him a couple of 1 month ago. He did at least some of the iconic scenes in the actual Lion King movie. So for you guys who are curious about that, you can have a look. I think he did CG mostly. I think he worked on the fire scene in the movie and the thunder scene, I think. But I don't remember if he talked that he himself was doing Unreal, or I think it was mostly CG skills. But yeah, it's interesting.
Well, the first Lion King was Unity, so they did that one in Unity, which is still real time.
Yeah, so it's definitely somewhere going. Last week we interviewed, I think it was Tom. He's going into virtual production a bit more, as far as I understand, and I think a lot of people are going into virtual production, and I think more people will keep going into virtual production. It's definitely a place to be, I think, to learn lighting. I think it's very lucrative right now because there's so many options. As long as you know. Someone like me who doesn't want to necessarily spend too much time doing Maya or Redshift or Arnold, you know, you can still work in the movies. You can still work with animated movies. I think also will be increasingly more into, you know, the Unreal Engine or Unity Engine. I've seen a couple of shows now and movies specifically. They're trying to do it inside, the technology. So it's definitely interesting, and well, hopefully you can keep us up to date in terms of how that goes and what you're working on. So obviously your new job, where is it?
So I just started at Industrial Light and Magic just last week, so barely know anything about it.
So do you want to explain your confusing title?
Well, so, you know, as you were talking about, this is a very new field and new departments, and a lot of them are still trying to suss out what they want to call themselves. But a lot of them have agreed on it being called a virtual art department. So if you're interested in something like that, there's a lot of studios that are looking for a virtual art department, and that is a team of artists that are establishing environments in pre-production instead of in production or post. And so this is like working with previs, working with art departments, and preparing stuff in real time. And the thing is about it right now, and I struggled with this quite a bit when I was interested in this and looking at it. It's like right now, departments have to be nimble enough that everyone is kind of generalists. Or at Happy Mushroom, I was technically an environment artist. And so at ILM, technically going to be a generalist. And that's fine because generalists when, I still have their specialties. So while I will be a generalist ILM, my specialty will be lighting for virtual production. And so
Makes it
that's
harder
going to be
though
something.
to
It does make
apply.
it harder.
Like
Yes.
if you're typing lighting artist, then you're not gonna find these opportunities because they're not adding the word lighting. And
I
if
know.
imagine if all of your LinkedIn history was just senior generalist artist and you're actually a lighting artist, I would never have found you because I'm specifically searching lighting, right? So
Yeah. Well, and that's a couple of conversations I had with other studios in which they were looking for artists for their virtual art departments, and the thing would say generalist, and I'd have to clearly be like, look, I think that there is a space for specializations in these departments. I really kind of focus on lighting. I won't be able to be great at modeling. I can help with a little bit of stuff, but I'm hoping in the future that will be more. It will be more like that. It's just right now it's so new for most studios, these virtual art departments, and sometimes it's almost necessary because they don't have the tools built or the workflow set up or the teams built. Like teams are very small right now.
okay, yeah, I mean definitely there's an opportunity. I've heard from other virtual artists, specifically a virtual lighting artists who work on certain projects where they're doing only lighting, more or less, as far as I understood. That they have to be really quick because during the set and recording, even they go, no, we want sunset instead of daylight. You have to be really quick because it's all paid and hosted and rented. The studio and the environment sometimes they don't own the studio set, right? So they are renting all the LED screens and whatever. So you have to be really quick. So I went like, yeah, I don't know if I want to be that quick. That sounds stressful.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is that there's enough, like especially with ILM and Happy Mushroom, the virtual art department is often not that they help with scouting where it's like the VR stuff, but there's another group that deals with like say the wall, and so if you just want to do lighting inside of virtual production in real time, you can do that and not have to worry about being that bottleneck on stage where it's like a really expensive volume and people are like, why does this thing look wrong? And they're all looking at you and you're like, hold on, let me restart Unreal.
Sorry, you just cost $50,000. That goes out of your paycheck. That makes sense. So you're a believer of virtual production being an increasingly demanding role or opportunity, basically, and you would advise people to maybe pivot more towards that direction. Is that how you feel right now?
If you're interested in it. I mean, lighting for real time is very different than lighting for shot based and production or post. I still very much miss Nuke, and that's not part of this. This is a lot more. I wouldn't say previs, but still kind of like you don't take it to the final look. There's a difference to it. And if what you want is to make beautiful shots and work on a Marvel movie or whatever it is, I would continue to maybe focus on, your Mayas and Arnolds and V-Rays and stuff like that. But if you are more interested in being part of like this pre-production thing, and to me, what seems cool is this discussion about the new phrase of fix it in pre, because even on, projects I've been on, things change so much at the end. Or there's this video from Thomas Flight about like why he thinks Dune looks better than like a Marvel movie. And he talks about, he thinks it's lighting, but I do wonder if there's also a bit more about Dune was extremely heavily planned in pre-production. And I wonder if there's like with some of these big blockbuster movies, if there's a lot of like fix it in posts, or they don't know what it's going to look like. And so they just kind of like broadly light it. And then it's up to the compositing team to try to get it to fix. And so like, my hope is with this like virtual art department stuff is that there'll be a little bit more of this like fix it and establish the environments.
Exactly.
And
That's
even,
that's what I think too is important. Just do it correctly in the beginning.
yeah.
That's like a good plan for me as well. I'm looking forward to these kind of things. So we're technically we are a few seconds over time, but what we'll do, we'll do one last question that's gonna pop up on the chat. But before that, you guys who are latecomers get to see our lighting mentorship video once more as a final. Fine, fine. I use it as an excuse to get off the camera a little bit quickly. So we have a question. All right, that's good. Going as planned. About the table scene that you had earlier in the video. If each character has their own linked lights, how the shadow interaction working out, like the shadow of the characters on the table, etc. So he's curious to know the how you made it look so continually perfect.
Well, and this may be a proprietary tool that had helped us out a bit, but there is a way in which I can have this table light that's affecting the light still cast shadows from the characters, still get occlusion from the characters, but not be lighting the characters. So you would see all of the shadows from the characters from that light, but it wouldn't be, the characters wouldn't be receiving light from that light. And so there was a couple of shots where it got a little finicky because you would definitely see where it doesn't match up, but for the most part it worked.
Don't tell
And
them that.
so well, I think it's good to know that stuff because sometimes you don't rely on Nuke as much as you should, or you feel like it has to 100% work in render. Whereas while it worked in this shot, there was a couple of shots that it didn't work as well. But no, this light that's affecting just the table is just not casting on the characters. Or the other thing too that what was the scene? We will render characters separately from the environment usually. I'm trying to remember if in this sequence I still rendered the table with the characters or if the table was separate. I think the table was separate. So the characters were on their own layer together. We used to do it where each character was rendered on its own layer and it became like huge Nuke comps. But like this group, it would be all the characters together. I think I rendered the chairs with them at least, and then the table was rendered as a separate layer, and so it made it easier for me to adjust and get rid of that stuff.
One of the advantages of Maya. It's a lot easier to do these kind of things. But I promise you, guarantee it's gonna be as easy to do it in Unreal and Unity because I know stuff is going on, so that shouldn't be a problem in the future. Do you want one more question or we're done?
No, go ahead.
One more question. Turkey Master, he's a loyal viewer of ours. It's pretty much here every time, regardless. So he's curious to know what mentor told you about negotiations. He want to know what was the advice you kind of briefly mentioned in the beginning of the stream. You were talking about, races or whatever. He wants to know what was it. Spill it.
Well, so one of the things is, and this may be especially a very American thing, is that people are afraid to talk about race. And so I went into this call with her and I was like, I'm thinking about, this job. I'm not quite sure about it. And she was like, I know how much someone who is a senior, of that position makes, and they make this much money. Don't let them, take you for granted. This is what you should be asking. I know these guys were making this much money a couple of years ago, and it was nice. And I, it's one of those things, like, maybe you don't like just cold email someone on LinkedIn and be like, hello, how much do you make? But once you have like a conversation with someone, you're like, I'm thinking about this studio and this location, because location matters. Like, cost of living in Los Angeles is different than, say, like, Florida or, Europe or something like that. Do you mind giving me a range for what I should expect for this position? Because like I've talked to a couple of juniors and they told me how much they had been offered, and it was outrageously low. And it was just, especially when you're a junior, you're almost you're very tempted to just take whatever they're offering you because, you really want this job. But behind the scenes, there's a range for a junior, and they will often give you something kind of on the lower range. So maybe they'll give you something in the middle. But if you look at that number and you say like, wow, I was kind of hoping for, and you can't, like, if you're a junior, you can't be like, well, I was expecting 70 an hour. But you can be like, well, could you give me a couple more dollars on top of that? Or, well, I was expecting in my next position to be making this much. And they may be like, well, that's a little high, how about this, or whatever. But at least you ask. And in fact, I've heard from a couple of people to say, like, never take that first offer. Always try to ask for just a little bit more, even if it's like your dream studio or whatever, to be like, well, that's a great offer, but I was wondering if, you could do just a little bit, better, or I was expecting this. And it's always helpful, like, if they ask you what your rate is, to try to turn that around and be like, do you have a range for this position? And try to get them to tell you where the ballpark is, instead of you have to guess, and hope that you made a good guess.
Cool.
Because if they like you, as long as you don't ask for something like, $100 an hour or something for a junior position, they will work with you. They will tell you that's not possible, and then it'll be, at least you asked. And then it'll be up to you to decide if you want to go with that rate or not.
That makes sense. So, no more questions. Sorry, guys. You can go to Discord if you want to have more questions. I think you're on our Discord or not, maybe.
Yes, I'm Christy P. I think I gave a little bit of feedback when I was free.
Yes,
and
you did. I noticed. That's how I remember you are there. So yeah, just stop by, ask your questions. I'm sure she'll have a look eventually. And I'll talk to her a little bit now. So we're gonna end the stream. We're gonna close the talk privately with her and get some feedback about the stream and all that. So if you watched the video so far, or even if you didn't, but you happen to watch this sequence, remember to like, subscribe, and leave a positive comment in the YouTube video, because then she will get more views in her video because of the YouTube algorithm. So that's a request for everyone. That's how you support us without taking any money, any time. So it's so easy to do. So we're gonna wave goodbye, say thank you for your time, everyone, and hopefully it was